Brock doesn't show up until the very end of Dead Rising. By the time you fight him, you've already dealt with Carlito, the special forces, the cover-up, the bombs, and the infection spreading through Frank's own bloodstream. You've been awake for 4 days inside a zombie-infested mall, and now there's one thing standing between you and the truth getting out. And it's a guy in a military uniform who seems completely reasonable. That's the thing about Brock that I keep coming back to. He doesn't rant, he doesn't monologue about the world domination. He presents himself as a professional doing a job, and the job as he frames it makes perfect sense. There's a zombie outbreak, there's a journalist who knows too much. The outbreak needs to be contained, and the journalist needs to be dealt with. Brock Mason is the person the government sends to handle both of those problems at the same time. The reason he works as a character, and I think he's more interesting than he gets credits for, is that he's not crazy. He's not driven by personal hatred or greed or vendetta. He's driven by procedure, and that's scarier. Let me back up and put him in context. Brock is a commander of the Special Forces unit deployed to Willamette. He's also, it becomes clear, the man who ran the Santa Cabeza operation. When the outbreak in the Central American town became a liability, the government didn't try to help the survivors. They sent soldiers to exterminate them. Carlito and Isabella are alive because they escaped. Everyone else didn't. That was Brock's operation. He oversaw the murder of an entire town's population to keep a government research project out of the news. And then 3 years later, the government sends him to Willamette to do it again. Here's what's interesting about how the game frames him. He doesn't appear as a villain in a cutscene where he cackles and explains his evil plan. You learn what he did to other people. Carlito's rage gives you that outline. Isabella fills in the details. By the time Brock shows up in person, you already know what he is, so when he presents himself as calm and professional, that calmness reads completely differently than it would if you didn't have that context. It reads as someone who has done this before and lost no sleep over it. That's institutional violence. It's not chaotic or passionate, it's organized. It has a chain of command and a budget and a timeline. The people executing it aren't monsters in a traditional sense. They're professionals following orders within a system that decided at some level above their pay grade that certain deaths were acceptable trade-offs. Brock Mason didn't decide to kill Santa Cabeza out of personal malice. The institution decided. He just ran the operation efficiently. Which raises a question I find genuinely uncomfortable. At what point does following orders efficiently become its own kind of evil? Dead Rising doesn't answer that directly, and I think that's deliberate. The game isn't interested in giving you a clean moral verdict on Brock. What it's interested in is showing you what the system looks like when it sends someone like him in a situation like this. Look at how the Special Forces operate in the mall. They show up in Case 7, and they are immediately hostile to everyone. Survivors, psychopaths, Frank, it doesn't matter. Their objective is containment, which means elimination. They shoot anything that moves because their orders don't distinguish between the infected and the people who survived the infection. From a pure operational standpoint, that probably makes sense. In a zombie outbreak, uncertainty is dangerous. But from a human standpoint, it means the people Frank spent 72 hours saving are now targets. The system doesn't care what Frank did for those survivors. The system cares that they were inside the quarantine zone. That's the logic Brock Mason embodies. The individual doesn't matter. The institution's objective does. And then there's how the game handles its arrival specifically. The Special Forces show up right when Frank is close to getting the full truth out. He has Isabella, he has the case files, he has the story. And the government's response is to send armed soldiers to clean up the evidence, which includes everyone who knows everything. Brock isn't there to help. He's there to make sure the same cover-up that buried Santa Cabeza buries Willamette too. Here's why I want to be honest about something. The game doesn't give Brock a ton of dialogue or a deep backstory. He's mostly a presence you learn about through other characters. So some of what I'm saying about his psychology is me reading between the lines. But I don't think I'm reading much that isn't there. The game points you in a pretty clear direction. The final confrontation in overtime mode is where the whole thing crystallizes. Brock Mason as a boss fight is interesting because of what he represents at that moment. Frank is infected, he's running on a ticking clock, he's built a temporary suppressant from ingredients he scrounged from a zombie mall. And the last obstacle between him and getting the truth to the public is a military commander who serves an institution that would keep bearing the story forever if it can. The fight itself is physical, but what it represents is a journalist with nothing left to lose going up against the machinery of government secrecy. Frank doesn't win because he's stronger. He wins because Brock underestimates what someone will do when they have no other options and the truth matters enough to them. Brock's death is worth looking at. After you beat him in combat, he falls into the zombie crowd below. He doesn't get shot. He doesn't get a dramatic final moment. He gets assumed by the exact thing he was sent to contain. There's something almost poetic about that, though I'll admit I might be reaching for meaning in a gameplay design choice. But the image lands. The man who ordered the death of a town to protect the government from the consequences of a zombie outbreak dies at the hands of the zombies he was there to erase. And then the epilogue tells you Frank got out. He told the story. The cover-up failed. Which raises another question the game sort of leaves hanging. Does it stay failed? Carlito's plan was to spread the infection across America. Brock's plan was to contain it and erase everyone who knew. Frank's plan was to expose it. Frank wins this one. But the system that produced Brock Mason, the one that ordered Santa Cabeza and then ordered Willamette, that system is still there. The people above Brock in the chain of command are presumably still there. Frank's story got out this time. The next time something like this happens, will it? Dead Rising doesn't answer that. It ends with a journalist screaming into the sky into the middle of the zombie horde. Then an epilogue telling you the truth got out. It's a win, but it's a narrow one. And Brock Mason is the reason it almost wasn't one at all. What I think the game is doing with him, and this is where I feel most confident in my reading, is using him to make a specific argument about how institutional violence works. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up looking organized and professional, with a clear chain of command and legitimate sounding objectives, and does the things that chaos and hatred could never coordinate well enough to do. Santa Cabeza wasn't destroyed by monsters. It was destroyed by a military operation with a timeline and a budget and a commander who probably filed a report afterwards. Brock Mason is what that looks like when it walks through the door. If there's a moment in Dead Rising where the government's role in the outbreak hits you differently than you expected, whether it was the Santa Cabeza reveal, the special forces arriving, or the Brock fight itself, drop it in the comments. I'm curious how people read him on the first playthrough before they had the full picture. Subscribe if you want more of these, and there's plenty left to dig into. I hope everybody enjoyed the video, and I hope everybody's having a nice day. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.